Hi everybody, thanks for joining today. My name's Alex Gotch from Beacon Legal. Looking forward to having a bit of a chat about London and the London market, and we'll get straight into it. We'll try and keep it 20 to 30 minutes. I know you guys are all busy people, so it's going to be a fair amount of content to go through in that period of time. We'll try and get some space for questions at the end as well. If you've got anything else to ask, then feel free just to message me afterwards directly. So as a bit of background, so I'm an ex-London lawyer myself. I was a finance lawyer at one of the Silver Circle firms in London for about 3 years, and then moved to Sydney in 2013, and I've been helping Aussies and New Zealand lawyers relocate to London ever since. So very well placed to give you some market info and also answer any questions which you've got afterwards, as well as assist with your move. So let's jump straight into it. So today we're going to cover a few main parts. So first off, we're going to just go through what the differences are between the firms and all the important points which come up in very common questions which people ask me, and then we're going to just go through points around when you should actually start to apply based on when you want to arrive, and what you can do to draft your CV in the best way to try and secure an interview, and then importantly how you can actually prepare for your London interview. And then also, if you've got any questions, feel free to just message on Zoom and let me know. And if you don't get around to answering them all, then just drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'll be absolutely happy to have a chat or to answer your questions. So first off, the differences between the firms. So as you probably know already, this is one of the huge differences between the Australian market and the London market. There's just so many different types of firms in London. There's so many more law firms in London, and they're all very varied as well. So one of the main things which people like about moving to London, and one of the big draw cards of moving to London, is there is generally a pretty big difference in salary from moving Australia to London and New Zealand to London. So as you can see from that graphic, there's actually a really big difference even between the different types of firms in London. So if we just go across the top, city firms, so these are the firms which are generally what you might call larger than mid-tier firms, so large international firms. This is the likes of DLA Piper, Norton Rose, CMS, Stevenson Harwood. And then the Silver Circle firms, so ones you've heard of like Herbert Smith Freehills and Ashurst would be in that collection. The Magic Circle firms, so generally the Magic Circle firms hire more Aussies than the other firms. Probably 80 to 90% of lawyers who move over will go to a Magic Circle firm. They hire on the most volume. So these are the firms such as Clifford Chance, Slaughter and May, Allen and Overy, Freshfields, Linklaters, and then the top US firms. So ones you'd have heard of, such as Latham and Watkins, Kirkland and Ellis, Simpson Thatcher. So all of the firms which have established their presence in London from the US. So on the salary ranges, you can see that there's a huge discrepancy between the city firms compared to the top US firms. Generally, if a lawyer moves from Australia and they go to a Silver Circle or a Magic Circle, definitely a US firm, they're going to get a really significant salary bump from what they'd earn in Oz. City firms, you're still definitely going to earn a lot more, but the jump's less pronounced because the differences are less. So as you can see, moving up through the seniority levels from 1 to 5 PQE, generally the minimum you're going to be on if you move to one of the large firms in London is about 90,000 GBP, and that could be right up to starting at 160,000 at some of the premier US firms, or even up to 190,000 at the ones who pay the most, such as Kirkland and Ellis. So that's an absolutely significant amount of money, as I'm sure you'd agree. Obviously, the more you get paid, the harder you're going to work generally, which we can just go on to in a minute. But as you can see, salaries tend to be very appealing and are definitely one of the main reasons why people make the move over to London. So average finish time, so I included this as it's quite good to actually put into context exactly when you'll be finishing work, and this is based off of me having done this for nine years or so, and spoke and helped many Aussies make the move. So generally, I find that if you're at any of these three categories of firms, especially the first two, the city and silver circle firms, your hours are going to be very manageable in reality, and perhaps not too different to what you might experience in Australia. Obviously, there's exceptions to that. Like if you go through a really busy period and you're absolutely under the pump, or you're closing a transaction, then yes, you can expect to work sometimes around the clock. If you're a Magic Circle firm, Silver Circle firm even, you can definitely expect to be very busy. And I do have good examples of lawyers, especially in the corporate practice area of private equity, who can be at Silver Circle firms and work very hard. I know from first hand, having been a finance lawyer at a Silver Circle firm, I definitely pulled the odd all-nighter, probably more than I care to remember, but it definitely wasn't commonplace. I'd say if you're looking to get a good balance of work-life balance, as well as good quality work and getting paid well, the Magic Circle and Silver Circle firms do tend to be the primary destinations for Aussies. The US firms, so if they're going to pay you this much money, if they're going to pay you more than the other firms, you can of course expect to work longer hours and have higher targets. This is an average, so 9 till 10:30. Mentioned Kirkland before, so the average time finishing at Kirkland is actually gone 11 p.m. So they really do get their pound of flesh, if you want to phrase it that way. But obviously you're going to be earning a small fortune working at a firm like that. On the average billable hours targets, so as being a lawyer, you have your targets, but you can often work in excession of your targets. Why I've included these tend to be the hours targets as to what point you actually start earning a bonus. So your targets at the city firms tend to actually be pretty low and manageable. So on a daily basis, you're looking at kind of 6 to 7 hours a day billable, right up to 2,000 at some of the more extreme US firms. Some of the US firms, if you're in a transactional area, look, you can be expecting sometimes to be working 2,700 up to 3,000 hours in a year, which is pretty much a day every weekend, as well as working till pretty late at night and the early hours pretty consistently. So that gives a good visual representation of what you can expect to earn and what the firms expect from you in return as well. So as you can see from the culture and support section, you can see that it obviously ramps up in terms of intensity from the city firms up to the US firms. Just to pick out some of the main differences. So with the US firms, it's very common that they resource their teams pretty lean. So you tend to get really high levels of responsibility if you're a lawyer in the team. You might have, say, 2-3 less lawyers working on a matter that you might have at some of the UK-based firms, which means that you're going to be expected to obviously work longer hours, but also run with matters from a more junior stage of your career, and really someone who thrives off of responsibility and autonomy. That's one of the main differences, and pressure as well, because with all of that comes high pressure. I'd say that if you're looking for a firm which is going to give you a bit more of a soft landing, then definitely the city firms and Silver Circle firms would be preferential to the Magic Circles, and definitely US firms. So that's really relevant to know. One of the other main differences which I pick up from the firms is the UK firms do tend to have a bit of a better social network, and a more emphasis on social gatherings and events. For instance, one of my big clients is Linklaters, and one of the lawyers who I placed there recently was telling me that they have a monthly Aussie and Kiwi drinks evening, and there's generally between 50 and 100 Aussie Kiwi lawyers at Linklaters at any one time. So it's generally pretty well attended, and it's a good way to get yourself into the London market and the London life and be able to develop your friendship networks. Whereas at some of the US firms, it cannot have as much scope to be able to socialize and interact with your colleagues. It can tend to be a bit more head down and get the work churned out. Not every single firm, but culturally, I'd say as a generalization, that would be true. So yeah, some real differences between the firms. Generally in London, the good thing is that quality of work is high no matter what firm you're at. So yes, if you're at a Magic Circle or a top US firm, you might be doing the headline work, which you might see in the Financial Times and in the legal press. But even if you're working at one of the smaller firms, and definitely the city firms, you're still going to be working on really good, high quality work. So generally, if an Aussie lawyer, Kiwi lawyer moves to London, the quality of what you do isn't really sacrificed, which is why these important points down the side are some really critical key criteria to think about when you're considering where you'd like to make the move. So when should you start applying? So generally 4 to 5 months prior to when you want to actually start a new role is when most people actually start applying, when we start to get your CV and your documents over to the law firms. Just to put a bit more flavor around that, it's specific to the person and your practice area. For instance, if you're a tax lawyer, you're an employment lawyer, a litigator at the market, whilst that area is quite quiet, you'd want to give yourself as much runtime as possible. Generally, it's quite hard to apply much outside of 6 months, but how you make it work for you is having a bit of flexibility as to when you might start. Because let's say you're an employment lawyer and you'd like to go to London within the next 12 months and a great role comes up, then my big tip is to grab the opportunity to apply for it with both hands, because it's never the situation where you have so many interviews that you get a large choice basically. So really thinking about when you want to go, but the key is having some flexibility and planning a good number of months in advance. In the UK, lawyers are all on 3-month notice period, so the firms are used to waiting for people. So although that sounds like a long time for us in the Aussie market, it's not in the UK. Visas take generally on average 3 to 6 weeks if there's no backlog, so that's not a significant element to consider. The visas tend to be pretty straightforward, and that's the type of thing we can always help on as well. We don't give visa advice, but having done this many a time, can definitely walk you through the logistics of the process. One thing I just wanted to point out, which is actually going to be really great once it comes into force, is that there's a new free trade agreement which is coming in between Australia and the UK. So it was finalised at the back end of last year between Boris and ScoMo, and that's waiting to be passed into law, which is hopefully happening in the short term. It has to happen within 18 months, but the Aussie government are really pushing for that to happen as quickly as possible. And why that's relevant for you as an Aussie lawyer particularly is that it's really going to open up the London market, because historically it tends to be the biggest firms in the market who are going to hire foreign workers and Aussie workers, and the smaller firms, the mid-sized firms, they're less likely to hire Aussie workers because one, you're not qualified to work in the jurisdiction, and they're less they have less appetite for foreign lawyers, and two, they also tend to just have a bit of a preference for the UK candidates generally, whereas with the new free trade agreement, it's going to mean that you will have a recognised qualification, because the Aussie legal qualifications are going to be reciprocally recognised in the UK, and also it's going to also provide a 3-year visa as opposed to the current 2-year visa, which should hopefully remove some of the favouritism to the UK candidates, because 3 years is a long time in this day and age. I think it's much more likely that the mid-sized firms are going to be open to hiring lawyers on a permanent basis with the 3-year visa. So that's really relevant to pay attention on. If you follow Beacon Legal, follow me on LinkedIn, then you'll be able to keep up to date with that, because we're keeping right on top of that, because we're definitely going to be making sure that we're on top of that to help even more lawyers move over to the UK and focus on some of the firms who perhaps weren't previously used to hiring Aussie lawyers. That's a really good thing which is hopefully going to come into force and be relevant in the not too distant future. So onto the CV. So with your CV, you want to try and get as much detail in there as you possibly can within reason. So don't need to be drafting your version of War and Peace. Like it's got to be still succinct and factual. I'd personally say 2 to 3 pages of A4 is the perfect length for a CV. You really want to make sure at least 1 page is your deal sheet or your matter sheet, and you go into detail on this section of the CV. So you're going to obviously have your boilerplate CV stuff like your education, a bit about your background, your career history. Your deal sheet or your matter sheet is really what sets you apart from the other lawyers, and should definitely have focus and claim the prominent real estate on the CV. So I'd say have that as a separate sheet. So you title it matter sheet, deal sheet, and then go into a good amount of detail on your specific work experience. So I put a couple of examples on there. So let's say you're a corporate lawyer. So this section here, you'd probably want to have minimum 5, but up to 10 matters, which are going to follow a similar format to what we've got here. So you're really giving a good overview of exactly what you do. So you'll see here that I've included deal values. It's always good if you can include them. Included company names, if you can do that and it's not confidential, that's also recommended, especially if they're well-known companies. That's always useful to do. You'll see the first section of this this summary is what the deal was. So that's obviously important to include, but what you really want to make sure is that you include your specific role on that matter. So this one is drafted to show that this person, or this is a made-up example, but was the non-partner lead and was the client contact on the transaction and run the due diligence process, negotiated the sale agreement. So this is the level of detail that you want to be able to go into. So it's not just stating what the matter was. You really want to be able to give the detail of specifically what you did on the matter. And the more senior you are, the more responsibility you've got, the longer that section should be. So take good note of that, because that's really important to make sure you use that when you're crafting a good quality CV. And then preparing for an interview. So back to the CV. So when you're drafting your CV, have in mind that this is going to be the basis for what you're going to be interviewed on, because this is what the partner or whoever's interviewing you is going to have in front of them. So when you're preparing for an interview, your CV should really be 75% of what you're preparing for, of what you're spending your time on. And you really need to be able to talk through each of your matters in a good amount of detail. And as I just mentioned, really being able to drill down into your specific role on each matter. So when you're preparing, this should be as detailed as exactly what documents you drafted. Did you have management responsibility on the matter? If so, how are you managing the juniors below you? What's your management style? How did you get the best out of them? If you're a senior associate or a lead associate, what was the arrangement with the partner? Were you keeping them up to date on a daily basis? Were they hands-on? Were they hands-off? Was there any complex points or any heavily negotiated points in the document which might be interesting? So it's really going into depth and detail, because the partners who are interviewing you don't just want to know what the matter was. They really want to get hold of what you were specifically doing and your skills on running a matter or a deal. So I'd suggest print your CV off, get it up on your screen, whatever you do, and go through and annotate your experience with bullet points, just giving good detail on what you're doing so you've got it at the forefront of your mind. And then when you actually come to interview, hopefully you'll have that info that you can recall easily, because you've done the relevant prep, and you can then share your experience succinctly, but also making sure that you really paint yourself in the best light, and you give good quality detail, which is going to help define your experience and set you apart to the other people who are no doubt going to be interviewing for the role. I'd say pick 2 or 3 matters that you can talk to in more detail than the other matters. So you definitely want to be able to talk to everything in your CV, but usually what a partner will do will be will ask you. They'll say to you, pick the one matter which you would like to just discuss with us, or what was the most interesting matter that you worked on. And then if you've managed to really prep on 2 or 3, then hopefully you'll be in a good place to give really great detail on those matters. And then your career and motivations, you'll always be asked, why do you want to go to London? And you should be able to answer that with 2 or 3 really good quality reasons. I put that last point of how long for, because generally they'll ask you this. So even if you're only planning to go for 2 years, something like that, try not to say that. You want to try and position that you're looking to go open-ended, really, because it's quite an easy way to get yourself put on the no pile if a partner thinks you're just going to come and leave again a couple of years later. So just bear that in mind. You want to be able to give specific reasons as to why that firm interests you. And this is where your research comes into play. So make sure that you've used the company's website, you've looked at the partners' profiles, you've looked in the legal press. If you're working with a recruiter, ask them. We'd always try and give our candidates good insider information on a firm, which can help you sell your experience to the partner and show that you've done your research. As an example, I'm helping a candidate at the moment, and she's interviewing with Slaughter and May. So one of the points which I discussed with her that she can use to give a good reason as to why the firm interests her is that their operational model is that as a lawyer at Slaughter and May, you work across the partner group rather than a specific team. So she's a corporate lawyer. So as a corporate lawyer at Slaughter and May, you get the chance to work on private M&A, public M&A, private equity, corporate advisory. So it's really broad experience comparatively to Clifford Chance, where their teams are all very siloed, and you're either doing private M&A or you're doing public M&A or you're doing private equity. So really understanding the firm you're applying to and being able to articulate exactly why and their differentiating points is a really powerful tool you can use preparing for interviews. Questions. So no doubt you'd have questions that you'd like to ask anyway. So I always say that questions should serve 2 purposes. So the first is to give you as much information as you need to really assess the opportunity. And second, questions are a really great way to show that you've done your research and you're really thinking through the firm and the role and where you'd fit in. So an example which you could use for this is, let's say you're interviewing at Slaughter and May and you're interviewing with Sally Smith, who's a corporate partner. You might jump onto Sally's profile and look at some of the work which she advises on, and you could say, Sally, I saw you were advising X Limited on the takeover of B Limited. What I'd like to know is, if I was an associate working on your team on that matter, what would you expect of me? What would my day-to-day look like? So you're showing that you've done your research onto the firm and the partners and what they do. And you're also asking questions which would, one, give you a great practical example of what you'd be doing if you were a lawyer in the team, so you can really understand. But also it just shows that you've really thought through how you'd fit into the team, and it really demonstrates that you've done your research and you're thinking practically about joining the firm. So that's just one example. I'm sure you'll have many of your own. And then the last point, VC interviews, there's no getting around it. It's not as easy as a face-to-face. You're not able to create rapport as easily. It can sometimes be a bit more difficult to break the ice at the start. So before you go into it, really make sure that you know how you're going to try and do that. I always suggest thinking about some kind of initial questions or like icebreakers that you want to use, something a bit more interesting than what's the weather like in London, something which is relevant, just something that you can actually converse on to break the ice. And so if anything, you can get comfortable, but just so there's a bit more familiarity, which you'd always do face-to-face, but can sometimes get left by the wayside on VC interviews. So it's definitely worth consciously making an effort on that. Last part, so managed to get that through that in 20 minutes or so, which is good. So absolutely happy to take some questions. So I've hyperlinked my LinkedIn details. So if you've got any other questions or you want to follow up at all, just click through that link and you can you can then just connect with me on LinkedIn and ask any questions which you've got. Let me just go back onto the Teams meeting, and then feel free to fire away with any questions on the on the chat. So let me have a quick look. Yeah, so somebody's, and sorry, I've actually got quite a few questions here, and I'm not going to be able to answer all of these. I'm trying to keep to the timing. So if I miss your question, I apologise, but do just message me, and I'll absolutely happily answer it. So someone's just asked a question on bonuses and bonus levels at the different firms. So if we use the UK firms, generally, I'd say the bonuses at city firms, silver circle firms would be kind of 10 to 15% of your salary level. So if you're an associate on 100 grand, you could be looking at 10 to 15k as a bonus. The magic circle firms, they all have slightly different structures, and they've actually all revamped three of them, revamped their REM last year to try and protect themselves against the US firms stealing all their best lawyers. Their bonus schemes have actually increased pretty significantly. One of my clients within two specific groups within private equity and corporate M&A now can pay bonuses. They have the ability to pay what they call a special bonus, up to 50% of your salary if you're really working big hours. But as an average at a magic circle firm, you can probably expect to receive 15 to 20% as a bonus. So it's generally a really good amount of money. At the US firms, it can be more significant than that as well. It can be 25%. There are sometimes even more if you're really burning the midnight oil and working really long hours. So you can obviously earn a fantastic amount of money at the US firms, but again, to achieve that with the bonus levels, you're going to be working really hard. So one final question. So someone's just asked, with the city firms, how many firms will be in that collection, and also just a bit about if that area is going to be opened up from the visa perspective with the new trade agreement. So within the firms which I'd class as city firms, there's, in my view, about 10 firms in that group. So some of them would be DLA Piper, Norton Rose, CMS, Mishcon, Adelshaw Goddard. And these are still really good quality firms. I wouldn't call them mid-tier firms by any stretch. You're still going to be working on big matters, big deals. You're going to be dealing with your clients across Europe, across the globe on occasion. I wouldn't say that you're going to have to compromise at all on work quality. You're still going to be doing really good, interesting matters and get really great work exposure. I do think that these types of firms are going to open their doors a bit more once the free trade agreement comes through, because historically it tends to be the more transactional practice areas where they are more willing to hire foreign lawyers. So I'm really hoping that once the Aussie legal qualifications are recognised in London, then that's going to open up some of the other practice areas which might not have been as common for the firms to hire Aussies, such as litigation or employment. And obviously there's going to be jurisdictional differences in the actual law which you'd have to upskill, but using litigation as an example, as you know, if you're not qualified to practice in a jurisdiction, that really limits you, because you can't attend court, you can't sign off certain documents. So with that hurdle removed, I'm really hoping that will open up a pretty significant number of firms which perhaps didn't hire, or didn't at least hire on the volume of some of the other firms. So that all bodes well for those lawyers who are looking to relocate next year. So that's the 30 minutes up. I hope you found that useful. As I mentioned, connect with me on LinkedIn. So Alex Gotch at Beacon Legal, provided the link previously. Any questions which you didn't get to ask, feel free to shoot over the question on LinkedIn, or drop me a message if you've got my details. Absolutely happy to have a chat. Thank you very much for attending today, and I hope everybody has a good day.